Well, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're currently located. The seminar is brought to you by MVP Software Solutions with website at mvp.ca. We can be contacted there or at 416-809-5539, but I will put full contact information on a later slide, and if you need to get in touch with us, you can copy it down from there. Just a quick request that you please remain on mute unless there's an issue with hearing or viewing something, hearing me or viewing the screen. You should be seeing a title screen there that looks like it's shared. Any questions other than concerns about hearing or viewing, please put them into the chat window and I'll respond either now or later if there is no time or no answer at present, most likely later. The seminar is being recorded. You should have heard that. I'll be following up with some information and a link for a talk and related paper in about a week or so when it finally finishes getting processed. Please make sure if you're on sign to open it, or if you're on the site to open up the chat window, we will probably be using it. So I'm Neil Price Jones, president of MVP Software Solutions with more than 40 years of experience in software quality assurance and software testing in a wide variety of environments, including financial utilities and telecommunications. Client size has ranged from 3 to many thousands. Most recently, we've been involved in managing the testing of mission-critical projects where the consequences of failure are quite high. That does affect my view as to what is acceptable in terms of quality assurance, process, documentation, etc. I have to have it for what I've been dealing with, and it's required for my particular projects, and it does impact the view I take of how much we need to do. Rob Verdi is a seasoned software leader with extensive expertise in organizational consulting and thought leadership. His track record includes significant and successful contributions in the following areas: maturity assessments, strategy and client advisory coaching, transformation and DevOps actualization, tool stack and best practices implementation, agile product project feature delivery and coaching, comprehensive testing and QA, R&D, and AI QA strategies. So a fairly extensive background there. So the question we have here and that we're addressing is, why would a small organization or a startup require QA? Or more accurately, why would a small organization or startup not be interested in QA? If you have any views as to why a small organization or somebody who's just getting going would have no interest in QA, please put them into the chat and we will try to address them during the course of the seminar. Just to set some of the expectations here, we're defining QA as quality assurance, and we're defining that as process improvement throughout the SDLC. We're defining QC, what you call the software testing, which includes both static and dynamic testing. So QC is a subset of QA. It informs QA, it helps QA get its stats out, and it helps define where places are needed for improvement. So why should a small organization or a startup care? Is it worth it? And the answer obviously is, well, that depends. Question is, are you planning to sell the product and get paid in some way? Now, if you are planning to sell the product and get paid for it, then if I'm paying for something, I generally expect it to work, with the possible exception of a few very large tech companies who provide stuff that never works. So your product needs to work. That's kind of a fundamental, but it's a requirement that some people don't tend to think of until later. Another question is, are you planning to get it incorporated into a larger product or have it act as in an intermediate way between two products? Failures attributable to your product will not make people happy. And I've certainly been in the middle of a number of multi-vendor fights where people are saying, well, it's the other product that is at fault, or it's my product is doing what I told it to do and what I said it would do. And certainly without backup, it is extremely difficult for you to refute that argument and say, my product is also working as it should be, and the concern is on the other side. No matter what you do, there is a push from both sides. And the other question, which is very current to myself, is, are you planning to sell the product into a regulated industry at some point or provide sensitive or critical information to a client? I grant you this is a large part of my recent experience, so I am sensitive to it. But in a regulated industry, the requirements for QA, QC, and all sorts of proof are quite onerous, and they're not becoming less onerous over time. with the increasing use of software to control critical infrastructure, plus the increasing sophistication of hackers, the ability to be able to prove that your product is sufficiently tested, has a quality process for building it, is very critical. If your answer, however, to all of those questions I just asked is no, and there are no concerns, then there are some rapid software testing techniques that you can use to get the product out. However, if your answer is yes to even one of those questions, then QA and QC is a necessity. So if you're planning to sell it, if you're planning to be incorporated into a larger product, which is not infrequently the case, or if you're going into a regulated industry, those are just three of the conditions that would require QA and QC. I want you to please note, if you're thinking about this, that while retroactive quality control, and I'm defining that, remember, as testing, is not fun, it can be done. Retroactive quality assurance, however, is an oxymoron. You cannot do retroactive quality assurance. It simply doesn't work. If you are building or testing or purchasing a particular small or medium-sized product, and if you're on the builder's side and you want your software product and your company to succeed, then the items on this slide are extremely critical. The customer experience. Now, UX, not to be done by AI, and we will get into a little bit of AI a little bit later, but UX is highly critical to the customer experience. As they say, you get one chance to get it right, or you might as well shut up shop and try under a different name with a new product. Accessibility is crucial, and it's another of those items that is extremely hard to retroactively install. We had someone change their mind, not on accessibility per se, but on approvals within the product. Every module had to be opened, a change made, substantial change, and then retested. Suffice to say, the client did not understand the issue, and the instability we introduced as a result of all those module opens, conversions, changes took a lot longer to finish off than was expected. And of course, if it's planning to sell into the world, then localization is critical if your product is or may be international. People can maintain multiple versions for different markets, but it becomes painful. Most products are configurable for the market, but it does need to be considered. I have worked with one client in the past for about 20 years, and he said everything could be in English and there would be no issues. Needless to say, that company's no longer in business, but the one in the same industry who localized everything is, and that company is growing, and they're growing quite quickly. So a comment that, if we could just get away with an English version of the software just did not work. And granted, it was international software. He just didn't want to be bothered with it. The second point is the business value. Is your product available for the stated times and durations? Now, this is both a technical question and a business question. We're going to look at it more from the technical question in here, but definitely the business value is of concern. Is its performance for the items you can control sufficient for the clients? You can't have a slow product these days for items that are under your control anyway. It's just there are other options, they will go. If there are other options, you can't be bothered. Finally, is it usable by the expected audience? Now, some products are for very specific audiences, and if they are and works for that audience, that's fine. I had a product for engineers, which I thought looked terrible, but they were happy with the interface, and it did do well with the intended audience. I thought it looked extremely messy, hard to read, and very mixed up, but they were happy with it. Security and compliance. The first one is kind of a baseline nowadays. If you cannot deal with the OWASP top 10, you're in deep trouble for websites, obviously. But I'm working in an industry where we're not really concerned about websites. We are concerned about adherence to industry regulations for security, compliance, testing, delivery, et cetera, et cetera. So this is becoming more and more critical, and certainly the software bill of materials needs to be controlled, something that came up in the last big project I worked on, where at the end it kind of slipped, and there was some risk, well, there was a substantial risk that the software we were receiving was not the software that was being developed and, in its entirety, certainly it was most of it, but there was concerns with what they were picking up. As I say, my more recent background is in regulated industries, and they do not take this lightly. If any of you are in the Kitchener-Waterloo area, you'll be aware there's somebody who's automating the creation and signing of SBOMs via digital signatures. And he's obviously selling into the industry where they're selling into an industry that needs to be regulated like that. And furthermore, if you are working in a startup or a small organization, then you may need more funding. And while there are many business questions you need to answer from a funding point of view, there are obviously things that they will ask you about your product. On the technical side, let's assume that your product is successful. And then the question becomes, is it scalable? Or will you have to re-engineer it? And many people have not really considered that on the initial design, and then they've had to re-engineer it and have subsequently lost market share because it just didn't hang together. Equally, of course, you put the product out there, user input, involvement, experience. Can you react to and incorporate any user input? And you have to keep in mind that there are unexpected users who may or may not be obvious at the time, and there are unexpected ways that your product might be used. And this is all, in my opinion, part of QA. We need to consider this process right up the front and say, can I implement this if the product becomes successful and I can get this feedback incorporated and through to the developers or wherever as quickly as possible? And can you be agile in both the IT sense and the business sense? We need the short feedback loops, earlier detection and resolution, and faster time to market. This is also a QA type process. We need to make sure that we can generate this and be involved when it's needed. So if you're applying for funding, then we need to be able to answer both the business level questions, but also the technical questions. And these are just some of them. Definitely in some of the places I've dealt with in Kitchener Waterloo, there is a bigger technical consideration than I'm listing here. This is just part of it. So why do we want to do QA? Well, it's conceivable that a small organization will build a product and get rid of it before the proverbial you know what hits the fan. I mean, you can do that. You can push something out, you can try and sell it off before anything happens, and then you're gone. You don't have to worry about it. But if you are selling into a big organization, then you will need documentation. They're going to cover themselves at your expense. And trust me, I was in the big organization. I wrote the stuff that was handed out to the small organizations. And that came back to burn me when I was on the vendor side and the same organization, big purchase organization, showed up and said, here, fulfill all of this. And I thought, damn, why did I write that? I should have missed it. What doesn't work in any of these is doing the bare minimum or concentrating just on testing versus process. So if your client is at all on the ball, they will be asking you for resolution and support processes. It's not like you can just dump it out and say, we'll work that out later. We've got to work that out before so that if something happens in the first few minutes, which it does, then you're ready to deal with it. So just a warning that if you are selling into larger organizations or into regulated, even small organizations, or into ones with high risk, we have to consider all of this. I'm sure everybody on this call, at least for those that I know directly, is familiar with this. This is definitely something that has been around for as long as I've been around, and probably longer. Shift left was very popular few years ago. Now you see shift right, then you see don't shift. You see a lot of things, but the shift left model, of course, was aimed at discovering the bugs earlier, shift cutting the cost of defect determination, resolution, and implementation, and making sure less bugs got to production. We all know about this. We all know the curve. You can argue about the curve to your heart's content as to whether it goes up exponentially or linearly or as a curve. Take your pick. Whatever it is, it goes up no matter what. So the cost of defect fixes, as we're well aware in in-field monitoring, what we used to call production, is substantially higher than it is in the earlier phases. And your attention to quality has to be included in that. Okay, so we talked a little bit about software quality improvement, and please keep in mind that software quality improvement is doing the right thing at the right time and getting the right result. And what we're looking at here is planning for this in advance, and this is much easier if it is done up front. So we're thinking of strategically about the process, not the product. And there was a quote that I read when I was working through this And someone said, the process is the product. And if you think about that for a while, it makes perfect sense. The process is the product. It's not the product, it's the thing that helps to get it built. So some of the things we need to do are identifying and planning the testing to get the correct coverage and identification of any issues as early as possible. So planning for this in advance, again, is much easier if it is done up front. Remember I said at the beginning, retroactive QC is painful, but retroactive quality assurance, you can't do it. You can't go back and recreate a quality assurance improvement process after. It just doesn't happen. You can go forward with it, but you've lost your initial cycle. Some of the other things that we are having concern or do have concerns about now are confirming that the reports and the information that we are pulling from the system is correct, both for you and for your clients. So both in the development process and in the final product. There is a large concern, particularly with AI, that the reporting may be obscuring items. And this one may have to be redone multiple times if AI is incorporated. So again, we're looking at the information that is being generated both during the process and after the process and asking, what have we got? Is it correct? And can we make sense of it? And a couple of recent examples, not public, I might add, of AI going sideways. And I know I'm picking on examples that prove the point. And I understand that there's also the counter examples. But someone recently took away the system under test, ran the AI to test it, and the AI reported it perfect in all tests green. So without any system to test against, it thought it was perfect. We could have shipped something completely untested. And this was a deliberate piece of a test. They simply yanked the whole SUT system under test and asked what would happen. Someone else, and this came up at a meeting a couple of months ago, was having problems with the output reported by AI from his system. He had a pretty good idea of what he should get and a feel for what should be the standard. So we reported it wrong, saying, this is not what I should be getting. And AI decided, apparently, and I have no idea how it did this, that the solution was to delete his database for his program, of which he did not have a backup at that time. So he had to recreate from scratch his entire database to test it on, simply because AI just grabbed it and said, good way to get rid of this problem is to get rid of the database. Now, I grant you these are examples you can pick on, but quality assurance would be saying, what about backup processes? What about ensuring that we're doing the right thing at the right time? Remember, that was my definition, and that's software quality improvement. Ditto for cost reduction. And again, this is why I emphasize that we need to consider quality assurance up the front. We need to evaluate the processes being used for development, for delivery, for support, for maintenance, for monitoring, etc., at all times from the 10,000-foot level to identify incremental improvements, which may be small, that can be implemented. So doing this in advance, again, I repeat, this is much easier if it's done up front, but you need to keep it in mind at all times. And every week, few days, 2 weeks, depending on how long the process is, take a look at what processes have been used and say, can these be improved? So we need to set aside some time to do this so that when we are deep within the development cycle, deep within the testing cycle, somebody is sitting there and saying, but is this the best way of doing this? And that may or may not incorporate aspects of artificial intelligence, or it may just simply be the standard DevOps cycle, or it may be the standard waterfall cycle. Whatever it is, somebody has to sit back and say, we need to think about this. The next one, of course, which I've kind of alluded to already, planning for the completion and looking at the end stage to make sure that the correct information is gathered up and available for proof rather than recreating, which I have done, it all at the end, which puts up the costs by at least 50%, if not more. It is much easier to capture things along the way. It may not be perfect, but it may be enough. And again, based on the background I have, based on what I work on, I have a very good idea of what is needed at the end because I've been through it more than once. And I can tell the testers that I deal with, you need to capture this and this as a proof, upload it here, and make sure it's kept there and don't delete it later on. And so far, I've only had one query come back from audit a year later, and the only query that I had was, where is the information? And I pointed them to the test tool and said, it's all there at this level. Please go find it. And I did not hear back again. Equally, of course, and this is something that is required, planning for all the required items to be available at the end date when we are supposed to be finished, which I refer to as the no surprises process. So you got to work from the end backwards and make sure that you have the documentation or the results or the proof, depending on where you're going and depending who you're selling to, that you need in order to go forward. If you make a market promise and you don't fulfill it, you may or may not get forgiven. But let's make sure everything is there and then review to determine the requirements and augment as required. Again, going back to more than one client that I've worked with who are either in regulated industry or high risk, they do worry about this. They do worry about that. And I grant you, they are covering themselves at my expense or whoever is working for his expense, but that's the way they operate. They don't want to have to recreate things at the end. This is definitely a follow-on from some of the earlier slides, and all we're suggesting here, obviously, is that if you reduce your escape bugs, reduce your post-release churn, and reduce your support calls, your clients will generally be happier. Um, Definitely, I've worked with some products in the past that have released so many upgrades that we gave up installing them because we couldn't keep up. Okay, there were so many upgrades coming every week or every half week. Granted, it was a product under change, and I understand that, but we couldn't test them to our level of security before we had to install them, and then the next one was there. So I know someone who literally was just throwing them behind his door. He was so tired of getting the tapes, and that tells you how old it was, so many times that he simply stopped. Now with online disbursement per sorry, installing processes, this is a lot easier, but some places, particularly the ones I've worked with, do not allow you in to install without going through a full testing process. So it's not always possible. And I mean, a reduction in support calls means more time for development, new features, enhancements, addressing customers' wishes rather than just their defects. All of it kind of adds to your ability to provide a better product in a shorter time. One other thing that QA may be able to help identify is a minimum viable product by simply asking at the beginning, what is the MVP? Now, a lot of projects go forward, with a wish list of whatever that they want installed and realize a lot of this isn't really necessary. And particularly for long projects, you get down to the end and it's like, why are we even thinking about this? This is irrelevant, particularly if it's been a while. So identifying the minimum viable product is a critical question, along with the risk and contingency to make sure that it is the minimum viable product. Keep in mind, by the way, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, that if you do add AI into your system and you're testing an AI infused system, i.e., one that uses AI in it, then AI, that incorporation of AI adds a third axis to your typical risk matrix. We have the two of impact and probability. We understand that. We know exactly what those are and we can identify them. But AI then says, well, I'm making autonomous or semi-autonomous decisions during the process of execution. How do I calculate the risk for those autonomous decisions? That is crucial if you want some sort of statement of what the output will be and that it will be safe. But you must review all that AI output. You cannot get away without. And this should all lead to a reduction in rework, which, as somebody pointed out, is a tax on your organization. And any sort of rework is simply lost time. And it's like you being taxed with no representation. I'm not sure if that's an angel there or whether that's a picture of Mr. Weatherby, but anyway, less taxes is better. Those of you who are in Canada, you know taxation is due on April 30th, and I'm still working on mine. It's right beside me. This is dear to me because of where I work. So compliance and risk management. So adherence to projected market compliance requirements. Again, somebody has to go to the end point and say, what do the markets require in terms of compliance? SBOMs, documentation, localization, proof, auditable proof, subsidiary or interim proofs, which trust me are hard to find. Any of this may be necessary. So it all needs to be retained in the event of a problem. And we certainly have gone to our vendors and said, where's the proof that this has been tested? Show me the test cases, show me the results. I want to at least audit it. It's really tough, by the way, to get that out of vendors. Oh, it's all, they don't want to give it to us. It's all private. Yeah, well, too bad. Consider the autonomy component to risk. I mentioned that. That's the AI dimension. And then, of course, quantify the risk on processes and defects. We are not just quantifying defects or development processes, sorry, defects. We are quantifying the process risk. If I do this process, what is the risk? That is a quality assurance question. I mentioned scalability before, and if you do become wildly successful or the product grows or there's new uses that we didn't think about, then we want to make sure that the product quality is there so that it works the way we expected it. Then we need to make sure the process quality is there to make sure that we can change it if we need to and have something that we can still sell at the end of it. You need your teams to know both of those things. What is product quality, which has multiple definitions, which we won't go into. What is process quality? And that's usually sort of a measurement, or it is a measurement. But your teams also need to be inquisitive, exploratory, and independent. So what can they do to help inquire into testing, explore differing testing ideas, and they're independent, obviously, of development. Again, crucial in the event of needing to prove it. They may need skills and training, and they may need mentoring and coaching, which will show up on another slide a little bit later. Quality and risk mitigation, whether you're in the testing field or the development field, sorry, some of these slides for some reason push forward, leads to improved reliability and security. If I mitigate the risks that are involved in my product and in my processes, then I have a lot better product than I would otherwise. If you have a risky process and you have to make a change and use that process to change it or use that process to test it, and that process is inherently not stable or risky, then you've got a bigger problem because you're making changes without a good feeling as to whether they're valid. This, of course, leads definitely to cost savings. There is no doubt that all of this will reduce the costs of fixing and rework to their attacks. It should lead to enhanced customer satisfaction. I know some people believe you can sell sell resolution of defects as the next release, but that really doesn't make the customer happy when they're told, well, we know about that, but you'll have to wait 6 months for it. Just doesn't go over well. Early detection of defects, that goes right back to my third slide where they talked about the cost savings involved with shifting left. And I've already mentioned regulatory compliance. The deal with regulatory compliance, if you've not been involved in it, is that either you address everything and solve it, or you have a plan to solve it, or you've reduced the risk to an acceptable level. And frankly, most of what we ended up doing was trying to reduce the risk to an acceptable level. It just was the only way around it, to be honest with you. So I wanted to add a little bit about testing an AI infused system into here because many of us are dealing with that. Um, there are two methods, one or two things we could think about. One is AI was used to build it, but AI is not involved with it after build. So, you used it to help code yourself code, you built it, but AI is no longer in it. Or alternatively, AI is still included in it. So some piece of the development is actually using an AI prompt during execution in production. That is much different and it's causing us problems. So TMMI, if you're familiar with them, talked about testing AI systems refers to the process of evaluating and validating performance, functionality, and quality of software applications or systems that incorporate AI components. There's our new addition. Everything else is the same, but that is new. So what have we changed? Well, we're looking at AI algorithms. We're looking at models. We're looking at functionalities that they work within the system as expected, provide the results, and meet the desired quality standards. Okay, we don't test or we haven't tested AI algorithms all that much in the past. There is something called model testing nowadays, which is testing the model that the AI is based on. By the way, there was something called model testing before, but that's not what this is. That was a different type of model testing. So these two are things we're not used to doing. Testing a base input data that much in the sense of a model with a big database, and we're not used to testing models as part of the system as opposed to building it and testing them. Other things they include integration testing, yes, functional testing, yes, performance testing, yes, but changed. So performance testing is ongoing in production due to the uncertainty of response from AI. Security testing, yes. Compliance, yes. Testing for ethical considerations like bias and fairness, yes, we've done it, but not in the same way. Nowadays, of course, some of this will continue in production, which is not the case in the past. With the uncertainty, the non-deterministic results introduced by AI, we will need to monitor this system. That's a lot easier than it used to be. I mean, it used to be very invasive to monitor a system. I can watch production, I can get alerts, I can get highlights, I can actually track a lot of stuff through it that I couldn't before without impacting it that badly. But it now needs to be done. And not just, when I feel like it to test something. It's got to be done on an ongoing basis. So in order to do a bit of control of AI and try to sort of channel that production performance concern, we've introduced guardrails that are supposed to catch every instance where the AI results may deviate from the expected, and then to make sure there is no harm. As somebody said, you cannot have an AI decision or a prompt returning a result that may harm somebody. So every API call may, actually will, need guardrails. So it's a little bit like control totals, but in a way different. I mean, this is different, but it's kind of the idea of at some point I can check and make sure it fits in with my expectations. As I say, we cannot have AI decisions causing harm. Now, what can AI do if you're testing an AI infused system? Well, adaptive AI can adjust itself at runtime, which means you may be getting different answers. There can be human and societal impact by what AI does for you. The system boundary diagrams, which is something we use to traditionally guide testing, may be sensitive or fluid because we're no longer fixing what we're doing. As he said, as this gentleman said, we are not good at dealing with non-deterministic systems. I feed in an input, I expect a specific output, at least, or within a range. It's no longer the case. Somebody suggested, of course, we use agents to test the agents, and I'm seeing more and more about that. I'm not sure I entirely trust it, but I am seeing it. And then somebody said that'll be agents all the way down ad infinitum, which is even worse. And then somebody suggested we do community-based testing. So two things came from someone else, also at Star Canada 2025. What foundation model is being used to teach your AI and to make it work for you in your system? And then, of course, he also mentioned the thing I've mentioned twice already, the addition of the autonomous access to the traditional two-dimensional risk model, so of probability versus impact. Issues with testing an AI fuse system, excuse me. TMMI, interestingly enough, said that generally speaking, an organization needs to have a level of test maturity before starting to face the challenges of testing an AI-based system. That sounds a bit like an own goal for TMMI, because after all, that's what they're in the business of, is ensuring you have test maturity. So kind of they're helping themselves there. But my questions are, what constitutes correct for output? Do we know if we don't know how the AI piece of the AI infused system may be reacting? People have already encountered problems with downstream applications being unable to respond from what came from the AI infused system. So the output wasn't what they expected, and now they're having to adjust for it. I talked about guardrails, but you got to catch everything. The interpretation of the results is now probabilistic. It's no longer deterministic. So anything that's coming out of the system has a certain probability, but doesn't have a certain, as it is not certain. Is reporting from the application correct when we test it? Are we actually seeing what we expect? This is a distrust factor. And do we know what is a defect? If all of the above is questionable. So what constitutes a correct response? Well, we have to worry about dealing with complex problems where AI is involved because they may not respond any better than we did. Data has biases, which is a concern. We can have model drift, data drift, concept drift. No test oracles. Performance metrics may differ. A lot of stuff that we need to look at in a sense. And we may not be able to use traditional test techniques. So what do? Well, some of what we do is offline, we test the AI model, validate it, and test it using metrics. And online testing, the integration of the trade model with the rest of the system. This is different from what we're used to. We didn't used to do this. This amorphous piece we have put in that was not there before. We need to continually review and revisit the quality system in live usage. Keep in mind, it could be model drift, as I said, data drift, concept drift. So things can change. Things didn't used to change that much. Now they can very suddenly, very unexpectedly, and with a lot of impact. And so that makes it hard for us to say we're done. Okay, when do I know if I'm done? When's the correct response good enough for me to go forward? And again, for those who came in a little bit late, the projects I've been testing recently have major risk and major impact if they go wrong. So I can't afford to have it go wrong without knowing what the answer is. Test performance indicators for an AI system need to measure how it's been tested, and the AI model behavior needs to be tested. Impacts I mentioned already of the system downstream. If you can't handle what's coming, then you have an issue. So if the output is slightly variable, the downstream applications may react in ways we do not expect. We talked about guardrails, and there is an old testing method of testing state changes between modules, but that's not something we got very far on. It's kind of theoretical. And I know somebody was doing a master's or a PhD thesis in it, which unfortunately I never got to read. I kind of lost track of him, but he was doing a thesis on testing state changes between modules. Something else that has not been considered, as far as I know, and at least in my experience, does the integration of AI make the system more expensive to build and to run? We haven't done a full cost analysis on that I know of. Now, conceivably, some of the internal bank people may have an idea, but I'm not sure how well they can quantify it. For those of you who might be familiar with somebody called Robert Sabourin, I don't know if you are, he's been around for many years. His comment was that AI may confidently provide wrong answers. It may fabricate evidence, violate policy, or invent actions. We need to block that because it can't be sent out as results. So his comment after that was, we need to communicate the possibilities, not the end state, the possibilities. In other words, yes, this answer is right, but it may not always be right. What are the probabilities of it being wrong? And what are the guidelines, or if you wish, guardrails, to stop it from being wrong, or at least stop the impact from extending beyond the internals of the module? I mentioned this before because this is of huge concern in my role as a test manager or test director, whatever client I happen to be at, because I'm depending on the results of the report, or sorry, depending on the reports to give me the results. And sometimes the results can be misleading. Things can go wrong partway through and recover by the end because of the way the system has been built. There was an example where the total was correct, but the individual months did not add up since one was missing. He was pulling the total, obviously, from a different point from which he was pulling the month to month records, which was kind of weird, but that's the way it worked. And it took me surprisingly long time, and I could actually read the code in that case to dig up where he had gone wrong because it was right on the end of a line. It was hard to see. So AI systems can be used in a wide variety of operational environments, which means the test environments are diverse, but the reporting is also impacted. So you're dealing with a lot of moving variables here that can cause issues with the reporting. So again, communicate the risk, communicate the risk of what is occurring. The reports may not give you that, but you need to give that. We've already alluded to the fact that we need to communicate the results as only statistical clustering. They are not deterministic. And again, Robert Sabourin talked about, advocacy, bugs or risks. What is the impact? Output focused communication. You're not going to come there and say sign off when you don't really know the answer. The problem being, and again, this is my experience, I have to sign off. They require my signature on the completion report to go forward. And when I sit there and say, but, I can't guarantee this 100% of the time, that causes a big problem. So I have had to communicate that much earlier. You're not going to get a sign off that says, everything is perfect or as close as we can get. You're going to get a sign off that says everything is probably correct and here are the risks that are still outstanding, which is not reassuring if you haven't communicated this beforehand. A couple of things about defects. Um, will the lack of knowledge of the coding hide defects that may show up after go live? Or will the test case self-correct and say we're all right? Think about my earlier examples. The test case is effectively self-corrected in a sense and said we were all right. Will we get new defects that we haven't seen for a while and thought we got rid of? Can we learn from the defects and improve our processes if the whole process is moving very quickly? And I talked about that in another webinar we gave where we said that the process is now going to be squeezed from both ends because, of course, you can, in theory, generate test cases, test steps, expected results, run it, and generate a report all in a very short period of time. Okay, well, that's going to make a difference to the way we work. And then we might have traditional defects that could simply bounce around. Somebody said we are just designing experiments. That's a bit different. And autonomy could be an issue. So what do we do? This is part of a talk I gave to test lead. Um, we need to do post-analysis review, and I cannot emphasize that enough. Post-execution reviews are going to be critical to ensuring that we have what we need. Document, interpret what has happened, ensure the answers to above. So again, this is all part, to go back to our original theme, part of QA to make sure we understand where we're going to end up and put in the processes to make sure we get there and then enhance those processes. For those of you who missed the second slide, which I know a couple of you came in late, QC testing is defined as testing, quality control, but QA is defined as process improvement. And the processes we're looking at are the ones that could get us across the finish line in the sense of having it there, ready, and complete enough that I can go forward. And if you've worked in a project-based environment, you know darn well that there's always an end date, there's a budget, there's a limit, and we have to make it to that limit. You cannot afford to miss that. UX and UAT, again, well, it's not part of QA, it's part of QC. Don't use AI, must be done by knowledgeable people. We need to build proper processes for UX and UAT. They are one of the things that tend to be very chaotic in some senses because you get users in there and they start saying things like, well, this is no good, this is too big, this is too small. I was actually through that on the very last project I was in. These guys have 6 big monitors sitting in front of them, and a couple other screens as well, just ancillary, just for the sake of argument. And once they got in there, and we had done a lot of testing to make sure that the figures were correct and the information was supplied correctly and everything was there, and they said the screen is useless. I can't fit it on my 6 monitors. It doesn't work for me. The fields are too wide. I can't get rid of them. And on it went. Okay, and on it went. And there were a lot of late rising defects revolving around the user experience, which is crucial because they have to be able to see what's going on at all times. I mean, they're running a power system. And they just said, I can't see this. I mean, you've used up half my screen with fields I never look at. Was the point. So we need to make sure that that's done and process-wise done earlier if we can. And we're just about running to the end of the talk. These are a few of the clients we've helped. For those of you who are in Canada, almost all of those will look familiar. Um, Rob and I have done some of these. The bottom one is a smaller one. The others you will see are much larger. I'm not going to hang on to that for too long. Just a bit of marketing. If you do need help, my company, along with my partners, do assessments and health checks, QE and agile coaching, consulting, testing, R&D, requirements and design. In that case, not research and development. Full SDLC management, training and courses coming later, and provide skilled resources and or train skilled resources. If you're not full-time, and we do a lot of this in Waterloo, um, particularly simply because it happens to be reasonably close to where I live, we do, fractional consulting and QE and agile coaching is required. So it's kind of on a part-time basis rather than a full-time basis, particularly for the smaller startups and companies who, they don't need full-time QA, but they do need to make sure that it's running forward the way they want to. Few partners of ours, Inflectra, Barry Olton Associates, Zonal ASD, Foley, kind of jumped there, Foley Web Development, and Angelin Information Systems, all in this case in Southern Ontario, with the exception of Inflectra. Okay, we have about 5 to 10 minutes if there are any questions. I'm not sure I can answer them all at this stage. Put them in the chat, or there's a very limited number here. A few people told me last minute that they couldn't make it. Feel free to take yourself off mute and ask if you wish. But as I said, this will be recorded and shipped out, and I'll put up the contact information so that if you do have something that occurs to you tonight or this afternoon, whoops, went one too far, sorry. You can certainly get hold of me there and I will respond. We have another webinar coming while you're thinking about questions in about a month with Swati. And she will be presenting, I think, either 4 or 5 weeks from now. I'm not sure which. I'd have to look it up. And that will come out to people who are here in the next little while. And we'll be looking forward to that webinar and hearing from her. Okay, not seeing anybody typing, not seeing anybody taking themselves off mute. So either you're all
Hey, hi, Neil.
overwhelmed or okay, somebody took himself off mute. Hi, Srinas? No.
Yeah. So in the UX and UAT, you have mentioned that this is done by knowledgeable people, right? In that slide. So what are the strategies can be, I mean, followed by a QA in order to test the UX? I mean, like it is like more like a front end testing, right?
Yes, it is front-end testing. You said, what are the strategies?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So obviously, if
Needs
you
to be
can get
followed.
hold, sorry,
So what are the strategies needs to be followed in order to test that one?
to test UX and UAT. Okay, so
Yes.
honestly, the best thing to do, obviously, is to find a good user, because they can deal with UAT. I have pulled in the past users from the call center, or from the client side to use it. But if you don't have that option because either you don't have clients yet or you can't get hold of them, they're kind of out in the public, the next best thing is to find someone with some knowledge of the industry and just say go at it, and see what you give me. And the third strategy, which I'm not really fond of, but in a crunch, what do you do? Well, you try to learn as much as you can about the system, or sorry, about the domain area that it is, and you use that and common sense to test it. But kind of as a scaling, sorry, trouble pronouncing your name. Um, Scale is the best thing is to find a good user or users, as the case may be. Second best is to find some sort of representative people who are close to users. And the third is to train yourself up as a a domain expert, a SME, and do it yourself. The problem with you doing it if you're on the internal side is, you tend to basically say, well, I understand that, and I'm not, that's all good. I can understand that. Why are you questioning it? Um, I would, one other thing which it's really tough to do because the users don't want to involve themselves, until it's complete, and then they come and complain, is to try and get them to look at mock-ups, prototypes, or if you have it, the actual screen, even if there's nothing behind it, early on, so they can supply some input. And if you heard my example, where the guy said, this is completely useless to me as I can't fit it on my screen because of the things you've included that you shouldn't have included, and you fix the screen width, or the field width, which was really stupid when you think about it on the part of the developer. Um, if I'd known that even 2 months earlier, it was an easy fix. But with 3 weeks to go on a 2.5 year project, multi-million dollars, it was very late to start into that type of redesign. Um, so that's my only suggestion in kind of a strategic thing. Number one, try and get them in early if you have the ability to show it to them. And number two, that scale of who to do or scale of who to use.
Yep. Thanks.
Hi, Neil. This is Swati. I'm driving, so I hope I'm not too loud.
Oh,
But
you're good.
I wanted to hear your perspective on the shift right testing. Um, I mean, that is another webinar topic in itself, probably. But do you see that catching on? Are people really benefiting from something like that?
Shift right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this honestly, Swati, this is not the first time we've been through this. Um, Shift left, shift right has occurred before. There was, a big push to shift left, and then somebody, and I've forgotten the name of the company, said, no, do everything at the end. Really strategically, I would say shift left is better because of the earlier discovery of defects and, you
Right.
know, the cheaper price or the cheaper cost, I guess. Shift right,
Uh-huh.
the problem, the advantage to it is, of course, that it is the entire system and you are testing it effectively under as close to production or release status as you can get, right? So this is the best thing
Hmm.
we could get without being in production. Um, so that's good from the point of view of does it all hang together? Do the results show up? How are the screens? And I could give you some terrible examples of misdesigns that we did, which weren't found until production. The problem is that if I'm on a fixed project schedule and
Uh-huh.
suddenly I shift right, and I am generally with a deadline, as you are, as everybody else generally is. And you come up and you say, well, I'm now discovering all of this, that is very, very late. Um,
Yeah.
and if it's quick to correct, if it's you're discovering stuff that but this is a well-designed system, I can correct it in a day or two sort of thing, or maybe even in an hour, then I'm not so bad. But the systems I had, you had to go through all the security. You had to retest everything if any minor change was made. It's like, guys, we can't afford this at this time. Um,
Hmm.
the previous one, and uh, one of the previous ones about, well, quite a while ago now, we stopped all code changes 3 weeks in advance and said, too bad, whatever you've got to live with. But we did allow configuration changes up to the last minute. So some of what the shift right people were finding could be addressed by configuration changes. So we allowed those to go through, even though it was very close to cut off. But the coding changes we didn't. So it really comes down to what's the risk. I just
Yeah.
feel that jamming it in at the end is going to boondoggle the project.
Thank you, Neil.
Okay. You faded out now, Swati. I think you're under a bridge or you've driven into a dead zone.
I hear you. Thank you very much, Neil.
Oh,
I
no
think it's
problem.
somebody else's causing some interference, but yeah.
Not sure how the time got to be wrong. We actually started an hour ago. So I have recorded it, so I'll just send you a recording when it rolls up. I'm sorry if the time got screwed up somewhere. Okay, well, I've got 1 o'clock. I have another meeting. Thank you very much for this. As I say, the recording will come out about a week. It takes a little while for it to process in Zoom and then for me to clean it up and get it shipped. But you'll get a link to a shared site that will have it in. Thank you very much, and we will talk again.
Thank you so much, Neil. Thanks for your presence.
No problem. Thank you.
Bye-bye.